Mes amis, bonjour. Quel plaisir d'être ici aujourd'hui. Thank you so much for being here tonight. It is my sincere pleasure to be here with you all. Thank you, Fred, for that very kind introduction and for inviting me to speak here just 3 days after the anniversary of President Reagan's birth. I think there could be no finer setting than this marvelous library, such a fine testament to his legacy, for the conversation that I'd like to have with you today. Ronald Reagan came over to my house when I was a kid. It was early 1981, mere weeks after his inauguration. He radiated optimism, confidence, and charm. He spoke of America as a shining city on a hill, quoting John Winthrop. I remember that he was genuinely interested in speaking with me, attentive and kind. He asked me if I liked Westerns. And I nodded enthusiastically because my father had recently shared his passion for Sergio Leone and Clint Eastwood with me. So the president recited from memory a poem by Robert Service, The Shooting of Dan McGrew. I was enthralled. At 9 years old, I just received a master's class in political charisma, and one that I like to think kind of stuck. As we look back now at the record of his first official visit to Canada, there's a lot to learn. For one thing, political branding can be deceiving. He and my dad, who was Prime Minister of Canada during much of that first term, were purported to have held opposing views about everything. They were fire and ice, supposedly. But Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, who governed Canada in the mid and late 1980s, is sometimes cast as having never disagreed with the president about anything. After all, they negotiated free trade together, so they must have always agreed. The truth, of course, as it always is much more nuanced. My father actually had a quite constructive relationship with President Reagan, as the archives here show. And Prime Minister Mulroney was actually tougher in his engagements with the president than the public perception. The fact is, for a Canadian leader, regardless of political affiliation, tenacity and focus are vital job requirements when it comes to working with the U.S. My father coined the expression that to be Canada living next to the United States is like being a mouse sleeping beside an elephant. Personally, I like to think of us as less of a mouse and more of a moose. Strong, resilient. Hang on. A moose is strong and resilient, but still massively outweighed. Consequently, we need to speak up consistently and clearly to make ourselves heard. Now, Canadians are often teased for being overly polite, which may not be entirely true, I'm sorry to say. But we are not and have never been pushovers. In fact, on many cross-border issues, certainly since the early 1990s, Canadian leaders of different political stripes have taken quite similar stances. And getting to an agreement with our American friends, which inevitably does happen, has always required hard work, persistence, and no shortage of sunny, Reagan-esque optimism on both sides. Acid rain is one example. This cross-border environmental problem was top of mind for Canadians in the 1980s. Canada engaged with the Reagan administration on this in 1981 and continued to do so in subsequent years under the Mulroney government. The discussion went on for a decade, but our countries got the Acid Rain Accord signed in 1991. And the same pattern has often repeated itself on trade. Among the catalysts for free trade in the 1980s from a Canadian standpoint was a need to defend Canadian exporters from a protectionist wave that was then sweeping through Congress. This eventually led to something far more ambitious than a mere defensive strategy, of course, something creative and visionary and truly world-leading. The Canada-US Free Trade Agreement of 1989 was the most comprehensive and ambitious trade pact of its day. It was not automatic that things would turn out as they did, though. This required leadership. It required persuasion. And it began with conversations between Canadians and Americans, not unlike the ones I've been having all this week in Chicago and San Francisco and here with you tonight. And Canada's message heading into the original creation of our FTA and then of NAFTA a quarter century ago was the same as our message today. America has no better friend, ally, or partner than Canada. We have the longest, most peaceful, and mutually beneficial relationship of any two countries in the history of the world. Simply put, if trade between Canada and the US is a bad idea, then there are no good ideas. Si le commerce entre le Canada et les États-Unis est une mauvaise idée, mais il n'y en a pas de bonnes idées. Today in Canada, there is wide agreement that the North American Free Trade Agreement, while certainly in need of an update, has been good for middle-class folks in both our countries. And after multiple rounds of NAFTA negotiations, the 6th concluded last week in Montreal and the 7th is scheduled for the end of this month in Mexico City, here's what we know. This accord should and can be modernized and updated. With effort, hard work, and a willingness to compromise on all sides, this is eminently achievable. Our negotiators have already closed 3 chapters on competition, small and medium-sized enterprises, and anti-corruption. They're within range of closing several more bread-and-butter chapters at their very next meeting. And they've become talking, thanks to some creative ideas advanced by Canada's negotiators, who are doing an extraordinary job, I have to say, about some of the toughest issues that have faced us in these talks, with respect to rules of origin for the auto sector, investor-state dispute settlement, and a regular 5-year review of the agreement. My friends, we've made progress, and it's vitally important that we build on that progress. I fundamentally believe it is in America's interest, not just Canada's, that we do so. Of course, I've seen the response that statement can draw. Of course, NAFTA has been good for Canada. Canada is winning in NAFTA and America is losing, and that's why you Canadians like it. Trade is not a hockey game. The truth is that both Canada and the United States are winning. And so is Mexico. And that's exactly how we should keep it. When trade is working as it should, all partners win. And the data bears this out. Now, you may have heard some of these numbers before. Actually, I hope you've heard some of these numbers before. 9 million jobs in America are tied to trade and investment with Canada, including more than 1 million right here in California. 2/3 of American states have Canada as their largest export market, and we're in the top 3 for 48 states. Every year, we buy more American goods than China, Japan, and the UK combined. We buy more California fruits, nuts, vegetables, and wines than any other export market. And because stats like these bear repeating, I will for the folks back home. 9 millions d'emplois aux États-Unis sont liés au commerce et à l'investissement avec le Canada, dont plus d'1 million ici même en Californie. Le Canada est le principal marché d'exportation des 2/3 des États américains et nous figurons parmi les 3 principaux marchés de 48 États. You've got leading California companies like Mattel, Warner Brothers, and AECOM with deep connections to Canada, both as market and through their supply chains. And you have innovators like Thalmic Labs, based in Waterloo, Ontario, with a growing office in San Francisco, a recent startup that's on the cutting edge of wearable technology, now serving clients worldwide. These are all examples of Canadians and Americans innovating, creating, and building together. Moreover, the sum of our trade, including both goods and services, is essentially balanced. In fact, in 2016, the U.S. enjoyed a trade surplus with Canada of close to $8 billion U.S. In manufactured goods, your surplus was nearly $36 billion. And those are American numbers, by the way, from the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis and the Department of Commerce, where, I'll admit, we do have a significant surplus with you, is in energy trade, about $37 billion U.S. in 2016. Canada provides more than 40% of America's imported crude. We supply you with more electricity and uranium than any other country, too. But those energy imports from a trusted partner, an ally, and friend support U.S. energy security. They're also, to be clear, in Canada's interest, because our exporters gain from access to the American market just as U.S. manufacturers and farmers gain from access to ours. And, of course, when you're more secure, so are we. Once again, this is and will continue to be win-win. In fact, since NAFTA went into effect in 1994, the U.S. economy has added 33 million net new jobs. And that's not a Canadian number, that's also according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. And to put it into perspective, 33 million is a lot because Canada's got a population of only 36 million. NAFTA, while not perfect, has been a good agreement for the United States, broadly speaking, just as it has been good for Canada and Mexico, broadly speaking. That is not in doubt. What is also undeniable, however, is that trade, global trade, isn't working for everyone. Income inequality is growing worldwide, and this is an urgent problem. There's been much parsing of the origins of the reaction against globalization, essentially against global free trade, that swept around the world these past few years. But to me, the most compelling testimony is the stories I hear from ordinary Canadians who tell me they've yet to see the benefits of the modern economy the politicians are always talking about. I spend a few weeks each year on the road doing town halls. These are unfiltered conversations with anyone who shows up, and there are no prearranged questions. And a lot of people are doing well, but far too many are not. I mean, if I hear from a single mom who isn't getting the services she needs, I can't tell her not to worry because someone else is better off. She's the one with the problem. She's the one we need to help. It's fine in the abstract to say that trade brings greater prosperity, and that's true. But each individual circumstance is different, and trade data, however positive, is not going to put your kids through college. So two things follow from this. The first is that the status quo, and I'm speaking here of NAFTA specifically, but also trade more broadly, is not good enough. We need to collectively do a much better job of ensuring the benefits of trade are shared more broadly to more people. And the second is that we must provide more help to folks whose livelihoods are disrupted by global economic shifts, including automation and technological change, so that they can reestablish themselves in new jobs with brighter futures. President Trump and I have often spoken of this. And I know our journalistic friends have sometimes cast our administrations as unlikely to see eye to eye about anything. The GOP is conservative, my government is liberal, and Canadian liberal on top of that. How could we ever find common ground? But of course, the truth is